The air on the Accra high-rise balcony was thick and salty, but Kofi felt only the metallic tang of regret. His hand tightened around the jagged fragment of the prenuptial agreement, PNA, folder, which now lay shredded, its stark white paper reflecting the fractured man he had become. The city lights below twinkled, millions of silent witnesses to his downfall and his strange, terrible victory. A voice echoed in his memory, a question he had answered with perfect, surgical truth, and that truth had just cost him everything he loved. But he had achieved his goal. No one, not even a court of law, could ever say he lied. The setup. Kofi was an anomaly in the affluent Ghanaian social circle of corporate elites. While his peers navigated business and relationships with the necessary, often lubricious, legal and social fabrications, Kofi operated with a terrifying fidelity to transparency. His financial pronouncements were final, his word, unbreakable. This reputation earned him respect, but also a deep, corrosive envy from his cousin, Kwadwo. Kwadwo possessed ambition but lacked the ethical foundation that anchored Kofi's financial empire. He had long coveted Kofi's family inheritance, a revered, ancestral land deed, but more acutely, he desired Kofi's fiancée, the stunning and ambitious Akosua. Akosua, a woman whose beauty rivaled the morning sun over the Gulf of Guinea, saw Kofi's honesty as a rare, valuable asset, a shield against the legal duplicity of their world. She was thrilled to be engaged to the man who never lied. Yet, beneath her virtuous exterior, she was driven by a practical, even greedy, desire for the secure future Kofi's wealth guaranteed. She often found Kofi's absolute truthfulness inconvenient, a sharp edge that occasionally cut into polite business society. For instance, he once truthfully told a powerful investor that his new corporate restructuring plan was fundamentally unsound, risking a lucrative capital injection. Kwadwo, watching the couple prepare for their wedding, realized he could never destroy Kofi with a common business scheme or a simple betrayal. He had to attack the very foundation of Kofi's identity, his absolute truth. He devised a plan that required both Akosua's hidden ambition and a deeply buried family corporate secret. Kwadwo understood that a lie can be refuted in court, but an unbearable truth, when forced into a legal record, is irreversible. He needed to create a scenario where Kofi's absolute honesty would serve as his own financial executioner. The first step was subtle. Kwadwo convinced Akosua, under the guise of strengthening the corporate bond, to perform a highly unusual preliminary meeting with the family's legal trustees, the signing of a symbolic vow of transparency, which required them to state the absolute honest desire of their heart regarding their financial union. Akosua, confident in her ability to control her public narrative, agreed, seeing it as a lovely, albeit dramatic, legal gesture. Kwadwo knew this meeting was merely the stage. The true test was yet to come, and it lay in revealing a forgotten corporate fraud from the past that would shatter the present. The preparation for the final PNA meeting began, setting Kofi on a path where the simple utterance of truth would become the most scandalous financial liability imaginable. The polished mahogany of the boardroom table gleamed under the recessed lighting of the family trust office. It was the night before the white wedding, and the atmosphere was a heavy blend of expensive champagne and calculated formality. Akosua and Kofi sat facing the most senior shareholders, the board of trustees, ready to execute the prenuptial agreement, PNA, and a symbolic vow of transparency. Kwadwo, looking impeccably respectful in his tailored Italian suit over deep blue Kent, stood just behind the trustees, his smile a thin, deadly crescent. He had successfully manipulated Akosua into accepting this extra legal formality, which was highly unusual for their generation, believing it would silence the few auditors who questioned her family's sudden, suspicious liquidation of assets. Kofi, though slightly unnerved by the legal performance, saw no moral threat. He held fast to the principle that absolute transparency needs no legal defense. He was ready to state his genuine love for Akosua and his honest commitment to their future assets. Kwadwo's entire plan hinged on this absolute, predictable certainty. He didn't need Kofi to lie, he needed to force Kofi to speak a truth that was so digitally traceable, so financially scandalous, that it would annihilate the social collateral and reputation Akosua craved. The presiding trustee, a retired Supreme Court justice known for her uncompromising dedication to due process, initiated the final P&A reading. She asked Akosua the first, simple clause, "Akosua, do you accept Kofi as your partner, wishing him sustainable prosperity, and do you pledge unwavering financial fidelity?" Akosua answered with a calm, sweet yes, her eyes briefly flicking toward Kwadwo. She was perfectly honest in her desire for the fiscal stability Kofi represented. Then, the justice turned to Kofi, her gaze piercing. "Kofi, son of Adofo, do you accept Akosua as your partner, and do you pledge your life and all its substantial assets to her?" Kofi took a deep breath, prepared to answer truthfully. But before the word could leave his lips, Kwadwo stepped forward, holding a sleek, activated smartphone displaying an encrypted folder. This folder contained the secret digital identity, the social security and bank records, of Kofi's hidden twin brother, Otto. "Honorable trustees," Kwadwo interjected smoothly, drawing horrified gasps from the few relatives with access to the family trust. "Before Kofi commits his assets to this P&A, he must first acknowledge a forgotten truth that concerns his life and all its financial valuation. He must speak of the twin who, by statutory law and the terms of the original deed, possesses an equal, undeniable claim to the entire portfolio." He turned to Kofi, his eyes glittering with triumph and betrayal. "Kofi, tell them the truth, that your late father, Adofo, to bypass a historical corporate tax liability on the main estate, filed a fraudulent birth certificate and moved your brother, Otto, to a non-existent corporate entity in the northern region. Tell them you know Otto is alive, living in absolute, untraceable poverty, and is waiting to claim his 50% share of everything you possess, including the land promised to Akosua." The revelation hung in the air like a denial of service attack. The scandal wasn't just the twin birth, it was the father's tax evasion, the long-held corporate fraud against the government, and the implication of Kofi's own knowledge. The trustees were stunned into silence. Akosua's composure instantly shattered, her face twisting from poised elegance to pure greed and fear. Her lucrative future with Kofi now faced a devastating 50% clawback. Kofi, faced with the unavoidable truth of his father's financial actions and his own silence, knew the choice was impossible. Lying was unthinkable, speaking the truth meant immediate SEC investigation, family fracture, and the dissolution of his multi-million cedi engagement. The silence following Kwadwo's devastating revelation, the existence of Otto, the digitally traceable twin, and the father's tax scandal, was suffocating. Akosua was the first to move, but not towards Kofi for comfort or clarity. She took 2 steps back, her hands flying to her mouth, not in shock at the family corporate betrayal, but in sheer, naked panic over the exposed financial liability. The image of the beautiful, secured future she had so carefully calculated vanished, replaced by the crushing reality of shared assets. Half of Kofi's substantial portfolio, the cornerstone of her greedy ambition, belonged to a hidden pauper. Her conditional love, tied to the value of the estate, instantly curdled into bitter resentment. Kwadwo watched her with cold satisfaction. He had aimed not for Kofi's conscience, but for Akosua's market interest. The presiding justice, recovering her voice, banged her ivory gavel on the mahogany table. "Kofi, speak. Is your cousin's accusation true? Does the forgotten twin, Otto, exist with an undeniable financial claim?" Every sophisticated eye in the room was fixed on Kofi. The trustees expected a denial, a desperate attempt to mitigate the legal risk, perhaps even a strategic half-truth about the tax arrangement. His mother, weeping silently in the corner, shook her head pleadingly, urging him with her gaze to lie, just this once, for the sake of the family's solvency and the multi-million cedi marriage. But Kofi could not. To lie was to surrender the one, immutable core of his identity, the principle of transparency that made him Kofi, the man who never lied. He looked past the distressed justice, past his despairing mother, and finally met Akosua's eyes. He saw not the woman he loved, but a woman whose true, cold greed was now exposed, her calculating ambition laid bare by Kodwo's machination. This painful realization was worse than the public shame of the tax fraud. Taking the last swallow of air that tasted of hope and expensive wine, Kofi spoke. His voice was steady, resonant, and utterly devoid of self-pity. Yes, Honorable Justice. It is true. My father, Adolfo, did manipulate the corporate records and hide my twin brother, Otto. Otto is alive. And according to the full terms of the generational trust, he is a joint heir to every single asset and fund. The collective intake of breath was immediate and final. This was not a simple business failing, it was a deep, inherited scandal that invalidated the entire prenuptial agreement. The justice, bound by corporate and family law, knew the marriage contract could not proceed under such clouded, contested title. Akosua didn't wait for the justice's ruling. Her mask finally dropped, replaced by sheer fury and financial rage. She pointed a trembling finger at Kofi. Fraud. You let me believe I was marrying absolute capital security. You knew this liability existed. You are a risk. Then, in a theatrical display of self-preservation, she seized the P&A folder they were supposed to sign, smashing it violently against the mahogany table near Kofi's feet, leaving the shredded paper gleaming near his bespoke shoes. There is no contract for us. There is only your shameful liability. With that declaration, she stormed out of the lounge, the sound of her expensive heels echoing the definitive end of their high-value union. Kofi stood amidst the shredded documents and the stunned, judgmental murmurs of the trustees, facing the victorious smirk of Kodwo. He had achieved his goal, he had told the absolute, legally binding truth, fulfilling the very title that defined him. But the cost was immense, the public loss of his fiancée, the ruin of his family's financial name, and the deep wound of betrayal from the woman whose love was measured only in percentages. In the weeks following the disastrous P&A meeting, the fallout was swift and absolute. Akosua became a social pariah, not for leaving Kofi, but for her exposed, ruthless greed and the theatrical nature of her financial abandonment. Her family's loss of social capital in Accra's elite sector was complete. Kodwo, however, seemed to flourish. He had successfully shattered his cousin's engagement and exposed the family's major tax liability, thereby achieving a perceived victory over Kofi's moral and financial supremacy. He now actively began working to locate Otto, the digitally identified, long-lost twin, claiming he wanted to correct the historical corporate injustice and, more importantly, cement his position to negotiate Otto's 50% share. Kofi retreated entirely. He moved from his spacious Accra penthouse to a modest, coastal property, dealing with the profound sense of betrayal and loss. The title he carried, the man who never lied, now felt like a solitary legal verdict, a financial liability built entirely of his own principled words. He had saved his honor but lost his security. The public envy that Kodwo held for him had morphed into a quiet, chilling satisfaction. Kodwo visited Kofi often, under the guise of offering legal aid, saving the sight of his cousin's perceived despair. He constantly stressed that Kofi's transparency was admirable, but ultimately, impractical and ruinous in the high-stakes world of inherited wealth. One humid evening, Kodwo arrived with a full dossier confirming Otto's location and legally binding rights. He laid the file out on Kofi's simple wooden table. "See, Kofi," Kodwo said, his voice laced with false sympathy. "The truth prevails. Otto is coming back, and 50% of the entire estate, the land, the portfolio, will be his. You chose your radical truth over your financial future, and now you must pay the full settlement. Kofi looked up, his eyes clear and cold, stripped of all recent pain. I have paid, Kwadwo. My payment was Akosua's conditional love, and the price was my father's corporate secret. But I never broke my word. Kwadwo chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. Word is cheap when your net worth is halved. Tell me the truth, cousin. Are you not desperate to keep your assets secure from this pauper? This was the pivotal moment Kwadwo had worked toward, forcing Kofi, in his despair, to negotiate a legal compromise, a small, justifiable legal fabrication that would finally break his integrity. But Kofi saw his chance. He had one final, devastating countermeasure to deploy, a strategic act of radical truth that no one, especially not Kwadwo, would anticipate. Kofi leaned forward, his voice a low, intense whisper. I will tell you the absolute, verifiable truth, Kwadwo, and you must process it. I do not care about the asset value or the legal control. I care only for my integrity. But I know what you care about. You didn't do this for corporate justice, you did it for envy and to secure the assets for yourself. I will sign over my entire 50% of the inheritance, everything, to Otto immediately. The moment you finalize his identification, all of my share is unequivocally his. Kwadwo froze, his triumphant smile dissolving into confusion and dread. This wasn't the expected response. If Kofi signed away his half, Kwadwo's entire play, which relied on Kofi contesting the division so Kwadwo could step in as a negotiator and eventually acquire the assets, vanished. Kwadwo wanted Kofi's half, not to share with an impoverished stranger. He wanted to watch Kofi suffer. Kofi's ultimate truth, that he valued integrity over wealth, had become Kwadwo's undoing, creating a new, terrible scenario built on betrayal and frustrated greed. Kwadwo's face, moments after Kofi's startling declaration, was a grotesque mask of shock, fury, and naked, exposed greed. You can't, he stammered, scrambling to gather the legal papers. You will lose everything. You must fight for your fiduciary rights. Kofi smiled, a look of profound finality crossing his face. I don't need to fight, Kwadwo. And I have nothing to lose that truly mattered. I told you the truth, my integrity is worth more than the entire asset portfolio. I will sign the deed of transfer tomorrow. Every cedi of my 50% share goes to my brother, Otto. This definitive move paralyzed Kwadwo. He realized his entire, elaborate scheme of envy and betrayal had backfired spectacularly. He had effectively handed the keys to the entire fortune to an untouchable third party, Otto, leaving Kwadwo with zero leverage and zero claim. Kwadwo's victory was reduced to a costly legal exercise that yielded no financial reward. Seeing Kwadwo's crushing defeat, built entirely on his cousin's steadfast adherence to transparency, Kofi delivered the final, most devastating truth, the one that shattered the last illusions of his own life. You wanted Akosua, Kwadwo. You always did. I will tell you the truth about her, too, so your envy finds no solace. Before you staged your public scandal, she pressured me to bypass the trust 5-year lock-in and sign over the ancestral farmlands to her immediately, claiming she needed immediate capital for a business venture. Kofi paused, letting the raw emotion of his statement settle, his voice dropping to a whisper. When I told her the truth, that I would only transfer the full title after the required 5 years of marriage, to prove true partnership, she grew cold and distant. Your exposure of Otto only provided a convenient, spectacular exit. She didn't leave because of the 50% Otto would take. She left because my earlier truth, that I wouldn't immediately give absolute control, proved I was too much of a man of principle to be easily controlled. Your plot was unnecessary. Akosua's love was never robust enough to survive her own ambition. This final, agonizing truth, that Kwadwo's grand plan had been utterly irrelevant to Akosua's calculated departure, crushed him. He hadn't destroyed a rival, he had merely been a theatrical footnote in the story of Akosua's cold-hearted greed. Kwadwo fled the coastal property, his elaborate corporate ambition reduced to nothing. Kofi sat alone, the silence profound. He had achieved his goal. He had told the truth every step of the way, even the final, heartbreaking truth about Akosua and himself. He was the man who never lied, but he was also the man who had traded his wealth, his fiancée, and his comfortable future for that single, perfect title. His ending was not a public confession, but a private, devastating realization. The greatest betrayal was not Kwadwo's deceit, but the truth that his own defining virtue, absolute honesty, was simply incompatible with the conditional, high-interest nature of human love. He achieved his truth, but lost his capacity for happiness to the impossible standard he set for himself. The profound lesson of Kofi, the man who never lied, is that radical transparency is a powerful shield against deceit, but it offers no defense against conditional love. Kofi proved that truth conquers greed and envy, yet he learned that uncompromising principle can lead to crushing isolation. Guard your integrity fiercely, but remember that love, partnership, and compassion require nuance and understanding, not rigid perfection. Do not let your virtue become the instrument of your own absolute loss.